Old School Lane Casual Chats is brought to you by oldsschoollane.blogspot.com and is associated with Manic Expression, the Comic Book Cast, the Reopen Nickelodeon Studios in Orlando, Florida Facebook page, and for entertainment's sake.
We're on the case and we're chasing her through history. Chrono skimmer, engines hot, vile villains, evil plot. Our brave squadron leader will help us defeat her and bring back the loot to its rightful place in time. Tell me where in time is Carmen Sandiego. Stop her crime and solve this mystery. Tell me where in time is Carmen Sandiego. We're on the case and we're chasing her through history.
Hello everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of Casual Chats. I am Patricia and I'm here with a very special guest. I'm here with writer, producer, director, and you may know him very well in stuff such as Robot Chicken, Mad, and being the host of Where in Time is Carmen Sandiego. I am here with Kevin Shinick, so welcome Kevin.
Thanks very much, Patricia. Happy to be here.
Thank you. And I just want to ask you a few questions. So one of the questions that I have is, where did you get your main influences for acting?
Oh gosh. Well, I kind of just grew up knowing I always wanted to be an actor, or I realized later more of an entertainer, because as my career shows, I started out as an actor and then I did writing and producing and directing and things like that. So early on, I know I wanted to make people happy. I wanted to make them laugh. I wanted to entertain them. And I think, I kind of grew up in the golden age of like Spielberg and Lucas and movies like that. And it just, that whole package of just great acting and great scripts and things like that really, really inspired me to want to go out and, kind of try and do something as well as I could to entertain the world. Okay,
great. And from what I understand, you being a huge fan of all these movies and TV shows and all these comic books and all that stuff. So when did you realize that you wanted to put that passion into being a major actor and writer and producer and director?
It just kind of happened. You can't help but just be be who you are and live in the time that you live in. And the culture, growing up, I was raised by television practically. I watched it as often as I could. And, I'm sure my mom and dad were always like, you're wasting your time in front of the television. And yet here it is years later, and I've actually kind of turned it into my career, And it was something that you don't even think you realize the knowledge you have of these things is of value until all of a sudden you realize there's a market for that, whether it be comic books or television or animation or plays or, I happen to be very lucky to be living in a time where, I grew up loving comic books and reading comic books all the time. And now, at the time that happened, it was kind of like, the geek culture. And so now it's like mainstream, so I'm just very fortunate to be in a world that has embraced all the things that I loved growing up. And you mentioned it earlier, but getting hooked up with Robot Chicken, there was a show that totally capitalized on everything that I loved,
Yeah, definitely. Now going into Where in Time, so how did you get a chance to be a part of the show? Was it like from a major audition, or did you know somebody who worked on the show? So how did you get a part of it?
No, I knew of the show. I knew of Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego. I hadn't really watched it, to be honest, but I knew of it. It was, you couldn't escape it, really. And then I had an agent, and she called me one day and said, you have an audition for this. And I was like, oh my gosh, I love that show. I said, but what do you mean? It's already on? And she was like, well, they decided that the producers realized the kids that were in the world did their job. Kids now knew geography, but they realized that they were lacking in their knowledge of history. So they were revamping the whole show, and it was going to be very history-based. And instead of gumshoes, they'd be time pilots and things like that. And so I had an audition for this show. And, I'm also a history buff, which is really played into that, and I really liked that. So I remember going to this audition, and then I remember getting called back like 6 times. I remember it seemed endless when I was going through these auditions. And, of course, the more you audition, the more invested you get, the more you learn about the show. And my hopes really started getting up, like, oh, my gosh, I'd love to get this. And then I remember one day after 6 callbacks, my agent called me and left a message saying, well, we heard, give me a call. And I was like, oh, no, I I was like, after all that. And so I called and I was like, what happened? And she was like, well, you got it. And I was like, oh, I was so angry at her for putting me. But I was so ecstatic because it really was such a great show, you know. And I mean, I'm saying that in hindsight because we hadn't created it yet. But I was just so happy to be involved with the people who had done Where in the World and involved with that whole franchise.
Yeah, and what were your favorite moments of working on the show?
You know, there was so much that I liked about that show. I said one of the greatest things was working with Lynn Thigpen, who was the chief and who became a good friend, and she was a great Broadway actress and a movie actress and television actress, and you know, she was such a phenomenal person. And of course, the only holdover really from Where in the World, and you know, here's a woman who was so established, and I was a newbie at the time. And she just could not have been more welcoming and inviting and just made me feel like family. And we really did become very close. She has since passed, which was very heartbreaking. But you asked me what one of the great things about that show was, and it was getting a chance to work with Lynn. And, you know, that being the crux of it, the other great thing was there was so much about the show that I loved. It wasn't just a host job. I was a host, but I was myself, but I was also a squadron leader. Kids were learning things, but they were also laughing. You know, we got to do funny skits. We got to do all these things. And it really was just the perfect storm for me of entertainment and all the things that I loved in a show. And after that show, I started, which is proof of this, after that show, I started getting a lot of host offers to host these other shows. And I realized that, you know, they weren't all like this. You know, being a host wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do. I think I was just very lucky to get a job that encapsulated so much of my likes into one show, you know, so that's why I did hosting for a little bit after that, but it was quickly apparent to me that these shows are not going to be Carmen Sandiego, and that's when I kind of shifted my career.
So, was a lot of the skits that you and Lynn and the other actors did, were a lot of them scripted or were some of them ad-libbed?
Well, it's a little bit of both. I mean, to give credit where credit is due, everything was scripted. We had a great staff of writers and researchers and, you know, historians and all these people who were able to script these shows. And yes, there's always a little bit of ad-libbing because the great thing is, you know, you're working with kids. You want to make them feel at home. If something happens on the set that wasn't supposed to happen, you roll with it. And they even, you know, they built into it, especially the second season, these different characters that I could play. At some point, I was playing an evil version of myself. I was playing my own mother. I was playing myself in the future. So I didn't need to ad-lib, but a lot of times, just because of my performance background and because the opportunity called for it, I was more than happy to. So it was kind of the best of both worlds.
What were your favorite experiences working with Lynn?
You know, just the amount of time that we laughed, to be honest. I mean, it was a job where I just looked forward to doing it, and which is important because you couldn't tell there, but we shot about 4 shows a day, and that can be grueling, you know, and one after the other, and there's a lot going on. But when you have someone like Lynn, or you've got a great staff, and you've got a great cast, it makes it like a family, and it doesn't feel like work. And that was what was so great about this show in general. But if you ask me one thing, I think it was just how much we enjoyed each other and how much fun we were having.
All right, pilots, for our next clue, oh no, we're getting pulled into a parallel universe! And so, we must do no good unto others before they do no good unto us. Oh, Commissar, I thought I smelled the familiar stench of your wickedness.
How dare you say such a thing? That's my new stench of treachery you smell. Just bought it yesterday, smell.
Oh, woof! Forgive me your evil wickedness. Either way, your stench is memorable.
Enough groveling.
Okay,
have you found that defender of justice, Carmen Sandiego?
Yes! She's in 1989, when the United Nations adopts a new treaty. It calls for basic rights that children everywhere should have.
Oh! The right to remain silent, the right to an attorney during police interrogations.
No, excuse me, you wretchedness. But those rights are for criminal suspects.
Yes! And what decent child wouldn't need this?
Oh, I agree. But this treaty, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, calls for the rights to health care and education and protection against discrimination.
Oh, this is all a plot by Carmen. She wants future generations of kids to be happy, goodies like her.
Oh, yes, your nauseousness. And only we can stop her. Here's to villainy and evil and all-around madness. Whoa. This takes a lot out of me. You guys okay? Yeah, the evil chief looked like one of the Pointer Sisters, didn't she? That's what I thought.
Yeah, I remember when I first heard about Lynn's passing a few years ago, and I was really sad about it, hearing about that she was sick for a while, and then I was like, oh man, the chief is gone. I was devastated when I first heard it.
I know. Well, the show is called Carmen Sandiego, and what I think really embodies that show, both those series, was the chief. It could have been the chief's Carmen Sandiego or In Search of That, because she really was the figurehead that we all looked to. I think I can speak for the people on Where in the World as well, that, she kind of was like the ringleader. She was exactly what the title called for. She was the chief, and we all treated her like that.
Yeah, definitely. I had a podcast with a few of my friends a few weeks ago, and everybody was talking about how great Lynn's performance was as the chief. They kind of said that she was sort of like the main kind of like the main cop from Get Smart, in which they would you would have either the host and the chief would talk to one another. The host was kind of goofy, the chief was very serious, and they would have like a whole bunch of fun things that they would do together. It had this wonderful dynamic that it just made it really stand out compared to other kids' game shows.
Yeah, I agree, because she was kind of like a motherly figure, not only to the kids on the show, but to the audiences and to us as well. Like I said, I was new to this, and she had the whole Where in the World under her belt already. But I think it went beyond that. I think, there's this woman who was, we were fortunate enough to be working together when she won a Tony Award, but she's won Tony Awards. She's, she was in Tootsie, she was in The Warriors, she had television credits, under her belt. So she really was like a mother figure, and we all looked up to her. And I think it showed. I think, the shows were better because of it. And I think we were in the same boat as the viewers, where we looked up to her and looked to her for guidance.
Have you kept in touch with the other actors or people who are behind the show, even still to this day?
I do. Not regularly, but, in this day and age of Facebook, we all get to stay in touch much more than we used to. And I'm very friendly with a lot of people on Facebook from the series. The Engine crews, I'm living in Los Angeles. A lot of them are out here as well. Elaine and a bunch of John and Jamie. I think Jamie's in New York, but not only that, but it was funny. Recently, the Huffington Post did an article, because it is actually 20 years ago, I think as of yesterday, that the series aired. And Janine LaManna, who played Carmen Sandiego, and she was the first one to really embody the character in a live-action form. This person wanted to do a story on that. And the funny thing is that Janine, by her own willingness, kind of is off the grid. She likes her privacy and stuff. And so the reporter who was doing this article kind of set out to find her the way Time Pilots would set out to find Carmen Sandiego. It was kind of a fun article the way he did that. And so he called me and he interviewed me about her and her working with her and stuff. And he did finally find her. And then he was good enough to pass her information on to me so that I was able to reconnect with her. So it was really nice. It was a little family reunion, it seemed like.
Well, that's nice. That's very nice. And, especially with not only the 20th anniversary of Where in Time, but just last week it was the 25th of Where in the World. Last year it was the 30th anniversary of the franchise. So, yeah. Hopefully maybe at some point somebody can maybe do like a huge convention or maybe a huge panel where they would gather up a lot of the people who are involved in Carmen Sandiego and, have a huge panel where you guys can come by and meet up with the fans and interviews and all that stuff. That would be awesome.
That would be incredibly awesome. I would love that. As you said, it still has a lot of fans out there. It's got a huge following. And, at the time we were shooting the series, I remember Jennifer Lopez saying she wanted to star in it as a movie. And even now I've heard her rumblings again saying that she wanted to at least produce a movie of, Carmen Sandiego and stuff. But I always thought it would be fun if we got everybody from both series and any incarnation of Carmen Sandiego together under one roof. I think it'd be a lot of fun because, a big part of the show for me was also doing a lot of appearances around the country when the show was airing. And I was amazed at the fan base, and both, young and old. The parents would come and say how much they enjoyed the show, and the kids were great. And people reach out to me all the time saying, they're adults now, or, how great that show was, and they'd love to, see it again. And what's amazing is, I actually have an action figure of myself as the squadron leader, Kevin Shinick, because it was one of the first sketches I did on Robot Chicken. And so they made a puppet of me. And my daughter saw that and asked what it was or why I had my own action figure, and she's 6 years old. So I told her, I said, I had this show. And so I, found some and showed them to her. And I was amazed that I'm not amazed that it holds up, but I mean, considering we did it 20 years ago, and because it's history, it was as relevant today as if it was then. And so she's going through the whole series now, watching every episode and learning things about history. And it really made me happy that that show still holds up.
That's fantastic to hear. So what is the story behind the Robot Chicken skit?
Oh, I think it was like one of my first weeks at Robot Chicken, and we were all pitching stories. And, you come up with any sketches you possibly can when you're in there. And I came up with this Carmen Sandiego sketch, and I remember Seth saying to me, "Oh, my God, how do you remember this series?" And I said, "Remember it?" I said, "I was the host of it." And he thought that was fantastic. He's like, "Well, then we totally have to have you do it. We'll make a puppet and all." And it was just, the idea that show was so fun and we all had a good time, but I thought it would be kind of funny because I had such a clean-cut, persona on that show that I thought it would be kind of funny if we pulled the curtain back and saw maybe I was having a really bad day or something. So it was all fictitious, but I thought it was kind of a funny take on, what could have been.
So the whole thing with the jacket wasn't real.
No, it wasn't real. It wasn't real at all. I mean, we've all been in those situations about being angry at someone, but I just kind of melded different moments of my life maybe to align with that time. But there was no jacket. It just seemed like a funny thing to play with. So we did that. It did really well. I get a lot of responses from that sketch.
That's great. Yeah, I recently saw the sketch, and every time that they would be posting something like that, or maybe something else from Robot Chicken, there's at least one comment that I will see saying, "It ruined my childhood," but in a funny way. It's funny that we can be able to take something that we grew up with, but you can turn it into a really dark direction. That's one of the brilliant things about shows like Robot Chicken, in which you can never expect to see even something like Carmen Sandiego, and the host just goes into a mental breakdown, wanting their jacket back, and then takes the kids over to a strip club.
You heard her, kids. We've got to retrieve the Brooklyn Bridge. I gotta take this. Janine, I'm doing the show. I told you we'd talk about it later.
I don't want to talk about it later.
Well, I have more to say.
No,
No, not now. What the f***? You want me to lose my job?
I don't care.
Oh, nice. He's there now, isn't he? You mother f***ing whore! Well, then I want my jacket back.
No way.
Yes, way. It's my f***ing jacket.
It was a gift.
No! A gift is something you give someone you love, you dumb bitch! Hey, kids. That was the chief again, and she said she made a mistake. Carmen didn't steal the Brooklyn Bridge after all. She actually stole a magical leather jacket, and we need your help to get it back. So are you with me?
What's so magic?
And we're off.
Well, two things. One, we must be doing something right because Robot Chicken's going on like its 10th season. And the other thing is, it is a testament to how successful that show was. And if a show is being parodied on Robot Chicken, then you got to imagine that it was a big enough show that the world does know that show. The culture does remember that show. And so, yeah, you may be ruining your childhood, but it's like, well, it's big enough that everybody recognized it. I think we could all, have a little joke at its expense.
Yeah, and it's pretty much the same thing for Mad, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the thing about Mad was we wanted to just, like the magazine, just poke fun at everything that's out there nowadays. And, there's a lot to be made fun of. And I think, again, I would be on the other end of that. I'd be making fun of shows, and I would get emails from producers who were running these shows saying, "Oh my God, we were so flattered that you made fun of us on Mad." And it's like, that's all. It's all in the spirit of that, you know. It's like, you know, to be parodied in Mad Magazine when I was a kid was amazing, and then even now I was so honored to be able to continue that tradition and just make fun of people in a fun way. I never thought it was very mean. You know, we're not making fun of like people who make the shows. We're all. You realize how small this world really is with all the people who work in it. And, you know, we wind up knowing a lot of these people and stuff, and we're all just poking fun at each other, and I think we can take it, and that's been the fun of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And for a lot of people who watch the show, they see a lot of the fun of it, too. And not only have you been writing for Robot Chicken and Mad, but you also penned a few Marvel and DC comics. So what was that like?
I did. You know, I've always been, as I said before, I've always been a big comic book fan. I've always loved them. And, you know, I did have way before anything, like, I guess, when was it? It was after Carmen Sandiego, but I did have the opportunity to write the stage version of Spider-Man that played at Radio City Music Hall and then toured the country for like 40 weeks. Basically what Julie Taymor did, but I did it like a decade earlier, and it wasn't a musical. And it probably cost about $60 million cheaper. But that being said, you know, I've always had an interest in comic books, and Spider-Man in particular, and Batman I always loved. And it was through things like Robot Chicken. You talk about, you know, people saying, "Oh, you ruined a childhood" and stuff. But at the same token, they're a bonding experience as well. You know, it brings people together because you can say like, "Oh, I love that show," or "Oh, I thought I was the only one who knew about that show." And you find that, no, there are tons of people who like that. And the comic books was a perfect example of that, because someone from DC Comics saw a Batman sketch that I did. I wrote this like Batman Shawshank Redemption with the Joker and Batman and Shawshank. And he loved it, and he reached out to me and said, you know, would you be interested in running a Batman comic? And I was like, oh, my Lord, yes. I said, that's all I've ever wanted to do. And then similarly, down the line, one of the senior VPs or editors of Marvel said that his family was a big fan of Mad. And I was like, well, I'm a big fan of Spider-Man. And he was like, well, you should write something for us one day. And I said, don't joke. And he said, I'm not. And so that's how that happened. I kind of wrote that. And then coincidentally, we're talking about this today. It was just announced. I'm creating a new Spider-Man series for Disney XD. It's going to be called Marvel's Spider-Man. It's an animated series that'll air next year, kind of in conjunction with the movie. And so, you know, Spider-Man's been a big part of my life.
That's amazing. Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm looking forward to everybody seeing it.
All right. Well, I guess we can wrap things up. So now that Where in Time is 20 years old as of yesterday, what do you think when looking back on it, like the legacy that it left as well as your personal experiences?
You know, it is a testament that it's 20 years ago, because it feels like yesterday. It really does. And as we've learned in this interview, you know, it's reached a lot of people. You know, I'm still amazed how many people email me or send me letters and saying, you know, how what impact it had on them or how they grew up. I mean, what's funny is, and this was so weird to me, the fact that, and this happened literally 2 days in a row, I had a meeting over at Nickelodeon, and I was pitching a show, and the person I was pitching to, or one of the execs, said, I feel odd saying this, but I was a contestant on your show. And
no
I was like,
way.
But then, no joke, the next day I was over at Disney, and someone's, you know, ushering me into a meeting, and they say, I have to tell you, I was a contestant on your show. And I was like,
that's amazing.
I was being punked. I was like, you are kidding me. I said, that's amazing. And again, the fact that it reached so many people, and, you know, Carmen Sandiego in general, the games, the video games, the TV shows, the books, there's all sorts of things. I would love it if one day someone did, like you said, a convention of that, just so that all these people could come together. Because it really is it's a great world to live in, that Carmen Sandiego, because it's also educational. You learn a lot of things. Like I said, when I went back, I was amazed. Other than the prize was a giant computer and CD-ROM player, and I thought that's pretty funny because it seems so dated. But that was the only thing that seemed dated, was the prize we were giving away. Everything else seemed very relevant and you know, and historical, which is what it was supposed to be. So I don't know. I think it brings people together. Obviously, from the fact that you and I are talking, that I get letters, that there is an interest still out there, and I hope its legacy is that people still remember it.
Absolutely. I mean, I still see articles to this day talking about Carmen Sandiego, whether it be the game shows or the games or the TV show or whatever. I still see people talking about it, especially in like BuzzFeed and other websites that covers pop culture. I mean, yeah, many people still regard it as like one of the definitive things that they hold in their childhoods.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look at Matt Lauer on the Today Show. They ripped it off with "Where in the World is Matt Lauer?"
Oh yeah, and they've done a whole bunch of that. There was the political the political spot where they did that for Marco Rubio. Then there was the Funny or Die skit. Yeah, there's so much of them.
There's so much out there. It's really great. It really is great that we touch so many people.
Absolutely. All right, well, I think we can wrap things up. So, Kevin, where can people find you at, and do you have anything to plug or self-promote, any upcoming projects?
Let's see. You can find me at Kevin Shinick on Twitter, and that's SHINICK. And other than, like I said, today it was announced at New York Comic Con that this new Spider-Man series that I'm creating is coming out. It's not coming out for a while, but they announced it today, so that's the big news. So you can look for that on Disney XD next year.
Awesome. Well, once again, Kevin, thank you so much for having the time to appear on this podcast. I really do appreciate it.
No, of course. I'm happy to be here.
All right, and that is it for this episode. Let us know in the comments below about your fondest memories of War in Time. Let us know about your memories of Robot Chicken or Mad and a whole bunch of other things. So, hope to see you around soon, and thanks for listening.
And we're chasing her through history. Throttle open, thrusters on. Chrono skimmer gets us gone. Have extra socks and we'll all beat the clock. From the Stone Age to Middle Age to Space Age and back. Tell me where in time is Carmen Sandiego? Stop her crime and solve this mystery. Tell me where in time is Carmen Sandiego? We're on the case and we're chasing her through history. Nero's scale, Lincoln's beard, Newton's apple disappeared. The finest tea from the Ming Dynasty, and the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria, we've got to get them back. Tell me where in time is Carmen Sandiego? Stop her crime and solve this mystery. Tell me where in time is Carmen Sandiego? We're on the case and we're chasing her through history.